For more analysis, we're joined by Mark Dubowitz, the CEO of the nonprofit Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. He's speaking with us from Washington. Mark, welcome to the program. One of the most pressing questions when it comes to Mideast policy is the question of the U.S. approach to Iran. We haven't heard a specific Iran policy from President-elect Trump yet, but Brian Hook, who was the special envoy for Iran in the first Trump administration, who is expected to lead the transition team now at the State Department, said in an interview with CNN earlier this week that Trump has pledged, quote, to isolate Iran diplomatically and weaken them economically so they can't fund all of the violence perpetrated by its proxies. Walk us through some of those potential options on the table.
So, Bian, I think you're going to see a return to the Trump administration's campaign of maximum pressure against the regime, which we saw during the first Trump administration. Severe economic sanctions going after the resources that the regime has now as a result of 4 years of significant sanctions relief and access to hundreds of billions of dollars with which to fund their regional aggression and their internal repression. So I think return to maximum pressure. I also think you're going to see something that we haven't seen from any administration, which is maximum support for the Iranian people, the majority of whom despise this regime and have been on the streets repeatedly, really since 2009. So maximum pressure on the regime, maximum support for the people. I don't think Ayatollah Khamenei is welcoming the idea of another Trump administration.
Yeah, though Brian Hook also said the regime change is not on the table for the Trump administration at this point. This maximum pressure policy is something that the Wall Street Journal had been reporting on as well, including potentially choking off Iran's oil income, including going after foreign ports and traders who handle Iranian oil, even going as far as saying they would support an Israeli strike on Iran's nuclear and energy facilities. We recall that is something that President Biden really urged Israel not to do in their recent strike. Is there concern that going after their oil infrastructures could see a spike in oil prices at a time when Donald Trump is promising stability around the world as his second administration term begins?
So, Bianna, if you remember that under the Trump administration, the sanctions had driven Iran's oil exports from about 2.5 million barrels a day to under about 100,000. They've spiked back up to about 2 million, but most of that 2 million goes to China. So it's almost clandestine and covert barrels that are not even part of the world market. And I think what the Trump administration did really well, and actually President Obama did this very well back in his first and second term, is that working with the Saudis to flood the markets with extra barrels kept oil prices down. I imagine in Riyadh, they're very happy that Donald Trump's coming back in, and I think would be willing to play oil ball again.
And quickly, Mark, I know that you were concerned particularly about what could happen in the lame duck and between the Biden administration, perhaps even at the UN, a repeat of what you said happened before Donald Trump began his first term in office when it was President Obama who was leaving office. Why the concern?
I have two concerns. One is on the Iranian side, I worry that Ayatollah Khamenei will use the lame duck to break out to a nuclear weapon. It's obviously very close. Most of that nuclear expansion has occurred since Joe Biden's election. I'm also worried because the Biden administration in February put in place an executive order that essentially creates a sanctions regime to sanction Israelis. It's the first time the United States has ever done that against an ally, and they've started those designations. I worry there'll be more designations against Israel, and there'll be another UN Security Council resolution, the way President Obama did in 2016, that actually enshrines this economic and financial war against Israelis as part of a UN Security Council resolution, making it much more difficult for President Trump to revoke or to rescind.
Yeah, we'll be watching in the weeks to come. Mark Dubowitz, thank you so much for the time, for staying late for us. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Bianna.
We'll be right back.